what does it mean to coach? We all have this intuitive understanding, but that's been developed through various, knowledges, right? And practices. We train as athletes. We go watch things on TV. We read magazines or articles. The way that we think about even coaching has all been socialized. Why do people think about these things so differently? What is it? Not just about them and their personalities. It's really, what is the knowledge? How were they socialized? How do they learn to coach? And why do they think that way? With AI, with the internet, and with social media, people are like, oh, right, like we have so much knowledge in our hands. Do you? You're right. You don't really have necessarily quality control or trustworthy mechanisms in that knowledge. And you also have so much in today's age that you're totally overloaded in this stuff.
Welcome to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. I'm your host, Dirk Friel. In each episode, we'll sit down with industry experts to discuss coaching methodologies, the latest research, and leading tools for endurance training. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources. My guest today is Dr. Brian Gearity, founder and director of the Master of Arts in Sport Coaching at the University of Denver. He is an experienced strength and conditioning coach, keynote speaker, and author. This was a thought-provoking discussion of coaching outside of data analysis and traditional workout prescription. For example, how does culture and society affect our decision-making as coaches and shape our relationship with our athletes? I hope you enjoy today's discussion. Dr. Brian Gearity, thanks for joining me today on the CoachCast.
Oh, my pleasure. Glad to be here with you guys and share some knowledge and see what else we can come up with.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to this one just because it's such a unique conversation that I'm looking forward to. So much of what we talk about within endurance sports is related to science. Certainly, you have a lot of science that you teach, and you're the founder and director of the Master of Arts in Sports Coaching at the University of Denver. But a heavy emphasis in sociology and as that relates to coaching. And that's kind of an area that we don't really actually talk a whole lot about, but yet it's so fundamental and so important to athletic success and prospering relationships within coach-athlete relationships and coach-team relationships. So if you can bring us back to the basics of sociology and how that relates to coaching.
Yeah, I mean, I was just having a conversation yesterday and today. If you think about an easy one, I think for y'all and thinking about this podcast is, the history. Let's just take the history of, sports, the history of endurance training. And you think about what people did, millennia ago or 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 20, 10 now. Like that's sociology. It's also history, but that's the sort of kind of historical social thinking. Like what was it at the time that gave people, that created their consciousness or created their knowledge of how they went about their coaching, their training, athletic performance, theories of athletic performance. Nowadays we would say more just science, right? Like what gives you your exercise physiology science or your biomechanical science? What did people think then? What do we think now? Why do we assume we're right now? Right? Like we always look back at how wrong we were or how much supposedly we've learned over, decades and hundreds of years. So that just little bit to me is sociology. There's a really interesting area of study called STS, and I'm gonna butcher it. It's science technology studies. That's right.
Okay.
Which is just an exemplary way to think about it, right? Like think about the historian in your science department, right? Somebody that doesn't necessarily focus on molecular biology or muscle hypertrophy or biomechanics of and aerodynamics of running. Somebody that's like, let's understand all of this in its historical, cultural context. That's a little bit more sociological as a start.
So then how do you become the director, founder of this unique program at the University of Denver? What's your background and how does this story develop up till today?
Well, I think to answer the question without being cute, right? The cute is nobody wanted the job or they couldn't find anybody better, and I'm the poor guy who liked to fill out paperwork and curriculum and put together a market analysis.
Create a whole new master's degree.
Yeah, right. It's a lot of work. But yeah, you touched on earlier. I've got an undergraduate degree in phys ed and exercise science from John Carroll. And when I was at Carroll, right, I studied all of that: fitness, athletic training, physical education, and then eventually got an internship with the Cleveland Guardians baseball team in 1999. And I was playing D3 football. And, my dad, listening to my dad, for my dad, I'm sure he's going to listen to the show. My dad, I listened to my father, and he said, study something that you like and that you're interested in. And so I promptly switched my major from business to phys ed, exercise science, because after a year of economics, and for all the students and others listening here, if you made it through a year of economics your freshman year of college, good for you. You're one of the few and a brave soul. So I switched over to something I enjoyed. I was big into powerlifting at the time too. I've always enjoyed lifting weights and playing. I played D3 football at John Carroll for a couple of years, and then I got the internship, and that was the end of that. Um, anyway, to speed it up, I was doing everything. I was doing phys ed, exercise science, athlete training, and then I ended up as a strength coach at the University of Tennessee for 8 years. Did all my graduate work there, and I really loved physiology, mechanics, or biomechanics, nutrition. But I didn't ever see myself as a scientist like that. I didn't want to be in a lab or all of that. I enjoyed reading it, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't identify with doing that. Identified with learning about it and appreciating it and making myself a better athlete and helping my friends and eventually the athletes I worked with. But it wasn't until I got into sports psychology class, qualitative research class, cultural studies classes, so philosophy, sociology of education, and really kind of getting into the mid 2000s, the whole sociology of sport coaching research was really taking off. And in the last 20 years or so, that the research on coach education and social theory and psychological theory to really investigate how coaches learn, develop, grow, and theorize the emergence of really this kind of professionalization of coaching and our greater attention on it. Right. So without going there, the detour, you can see I'm excited to talk about that too. But so I did that for 8 years, did all my grad work there, and then I applied for a couple of professor jobs, got the jobs, and then University of Denver was starting a new program, and I had a history in teaching online, teaching coaches. So when I interviewed, right, it kind of made sense, and fortunate to get the position and be here for 9 years now. Started that program, certificate programs in psychology of coaching, strength conditioning, and then this past year we started a undergraduate major in kinesiology and sports studies. And then 3 years ago, we started the minor in the same name. So we're just off and running and trying to kind of, improve our local community throughout all sports with an emphasis on coaching.
Yeah. Now, how would you explain differences between just taking sports psychology versus the sociology of sport?
Yeah. So, if you look at sociology of sport, and I teach a sociology of sport class, and if you think about sociology of sport coaching, I'll take those two to start with.
Yeah.
The textbooks, the primary textbooks, right? Sociology of sport is going to think about sport as an social institution, its history, its values, its norms. It's going to look at issues of, social identity, so race, class, gender, sexuality, economics, politics, those things, as it applies kind of globally to sport, right? Across different sports, different contexts. So pro sports, youth sports, college sports, in the U.S., internationally. Whereas, and so I'm thinking about like the textbooks there. I use Jay Coakley's textbook, who, has got probably the most popular textbook in sports. It's called Sports and Society. It's been around for 40 plus years. And he takes up issues like, let's say, violence and deviance in there. And we tend not to look at that in sociology of sport coaching as much. So some of the topical interests overlap and some of them deviate or not deviate, but differ. And then if you look in sociology of sport coaching, in the 2000s, when that started really getting popular, there was folks named Robin Jones, Jim Dennison, Chris Cushion, and then they're kind of early doc students like Paul Potrak and now Lee Nelson, myself, others that use this similar social theory and sociological tools to investigate coaching performance, coaching education, how things like knowledge, power, again, identity, now emotions, and just the way that we even conceptualize coaching, right? If I turn it back and, what does it mean to coach? We all have this intuitive
Yeah.
understanding, but that's been developed through various, knowledges, right? And practices. We train as athletes. We go watch things on TV. We read magazines or articles. The way that we think about even coaching has all been socialized, right? Or we reflect and we make it a little bit more conscious. So within
Right.
sociology of sport versus sociology of sport coaching, we'll have different focus. And then if we compare that to sports psychology or psychology of sport, right? Um, Sports psychology tends to look at a little bit more. The main focus for many years was one, effective coaching. So there's early books in 50, 60 years ago on the psychology of coaching, and one book called Dealing with Problem Athletes. And it reflected, right, as a sociological person, you're going, man, that's a unique name for a book, huh? And well,
Yeah.
what was it about that particular time period that would bring forth, and we might say birth, this kind of book on a topic like that? Like, it'd be weird to call a book like that nowadays. So things have changed, right? And in some ways, does that mean it's outdated? Does that mean we're better today? That's clearly debatable. But that's what a more sociological, historical, cultural person would look at. Whereas traditional sports psychology looks at, let's just take mental skills, right? So
Right.
enhancing focus, attention, arousal, dealing with anxiety and other issues of sport performance, the more mental, behavioral, and some emotional aspects of it. But trying to dial in, especially with athletes, how do you perform at your peak level, optimal levels? Let's see if we can consistently get you there. And
Yeah.
use a variety of tools like goal setting, again, diaphragmic breathing, mindfulness, relaxation to help increase performance. Whereas on the sociological side, there's a really interesting book called McMindfulness, right? So, and I'll go back to answer your question specifically about sociology of sport or sport coaching and sports psychology. Sports psychology often uses mindfulness to enhance performance. Sociology will give it a little bit more critical look and be like, well, why are we even doing that? Why is sports so stressful? Or why is life so stressful? And why are we emphasizing this? And there's a
Yeah.
great book called Make Mindfulness that gets into how we have, exploited and developed this whole way of knowing about mindfulness. And again, it's not to knock mindfulness itself, but it's to look at it in its historical context for all of its effects, and why now this emphasis on it, and a little bit more kind of critical and not a functional, like we want to do this to enhance performance. It's not so, we're doing this in a transactional functionalist sort of way. How did I do on
Right.
that one? That was pretty good. I like that so far.
Well, you mentioned anxiety, like within sports psychology, and the coach has a large role to play, and it goes beyond prescribing tomorrow's workout. Do times 20 minutes in zone 3 in tomorrow's run. Like coaching. I mean, I've heard you mention the biopsychosocial
Yep.
model, and are they equal? Talk about the, I
Yep.
mean, it seems like for each athlete it can be different. Some
Yep.
athletes literally thrive on, I just want the 2 times 20 minutes zone 3, give it to me, I'll do it all day long. Other athletes that'll bring anxiety.
Yep.
Therefore, then how does the coach, even one, recognize that anxiety, two, deal with it, try and head
Yep.
it off the next time we have the same workout? That's this more interaction between coach athlete as well as teammates and squad. And then it elevates even further, and there's more rings to this, right?
Yep.
So that sociology of how can a coach first realize that, and then try and resolve some of these issues that are coming up. And that's just kind of the IQ factor, the emotional IQ of being self-aware.
Yeah, right. So like sociologically, right, you would bring it back into an emotional intelligence and IQ as a psychological kind of concept usually is interesting
Yeah.
sociologically because, right, like sociologists wouldn't probably jump to that area, but psychology would. And it's interesting to think about why is that, right? Because emotional intelligence has become, very popularized in today's age too, with a few key textbooks, and a complementing behavioral and cognitive behavioral sort of ways of knowing, so that we're appreciating emotions, but emotions specifically from a certain framework is another sociological observation. Um, you really touched on a lot of different things. So to hit on one thing that stood out to me too, there is, I think it depends on the problem. As a coach, what is maybe the key problem that you're dealing with, and how we frame a problem is one of the things that we teach and we talk about in our program too.
Mm-hmm.
So is the problem biological, psychological, or social? Right. And so if we think about maybe a few easy things across those different areas of how we might typically look at it, is the problem physiology, right? Is it go out and run at this heart rate or this zone or this intensity, for this many minutes at this many pace or miles, whatever it might be. You can think about that as a basic physiological problem. We would years ago try to understand, aerobic, anaerobic pathways and mechanisms, right? It's very important. And also now we look at it as a relatively basic thing to understand. Made a lot of great advances in that area. As a strength coach as well, and as a power lifter, it would be contraindicated for me to go out and run miles upon miles. But if I was working with more of an endurance athlete, I would want to know and appreciate that other scientific knowledge as well. So, right, if the problem is muscle mass, strength, endurance, we want to have the right tool for it. If the problem is anxiety and, people's arousal, they're getting too high, they're getting too low, loss of motivation, right? I think about some sports where there are they practice great, but then they transfer to the game is not so good, right? You get in football. I just got done coaching my son's youth football team. We would say you're a scout team All-American, and then you get in the game and you're a dud, right? Same thing, right? So that's maybe more psychological, or it could be a social, right? If I think about endurance sports, how do we diversify endurance sports, or how do we get more people involved, make them feel included? You alluded to earlier, team dynamics, right? If you've got a team problem where the team is arguing, heavy in conflict, saying things that are mean-spirited to each other, they're doing things to hamper inclusion and access and performance. We want to deal with that, right? So depending on what we think is the key problem, is going to maybe direct our tools that we have in our tool belt to address that too. So having the range of things to think about can help us think about coaching differently in athlete training programs. And like you said too, I really like the intersection of biopsychosocial. As a phys ed major, how I thought about practice plans and training plans was very different than the football coach or the track coach, the cross country coach, the youth coach. So, why do people think about these things so differently? What is it? Not just about them and their personalities. It's really, what is the knowledge? How were they socialized? How do they learn to coach? And why do they think that way? And appreciating that probably nobody's ever, fully right or fully wrong. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but making sense of that is one of the kind of things that we really try to emphasize in getting folks to be reflective about not only their themselves and their emotional intelligence, like you said, but also all of the forces that went into creating their biographies and the ecosystem around them too. So that's a little bit, does that make sense too? Does that kind of speak to the difference between maybe the mindset that we often talk about versus situating that mind in society?
Yeah, exactly. The lens that you see through. I think an athlete's job is just simply look through their own lens, right? They're not trying to think about others. But a coach working with a squad, a team, an individual needs to think in terms of the lens and what the athlete brings to the table and how they view the situation. But I kind of take that back. An athlete should be thinking through the eyes of others as well, especially if it's a team situation. And you might have a triathlon squad training together. Triathlon is not inherently a team sport, but you may train as a squad. And if you as an athlete are always somehow interacting with another athlete, and it somehow creates negativity within the group, that brings the entire group down.
Right.
So I guess having that coach realize that, see it through the different lens of somebody else and seeing the different perspective is so valuable. And again, in many ways, it's much more important than actually today's workout.
Yeah, I mean, right. I've read some grants. I do some work with the National Strength Conditioning Association Foundation, and I read grant proposals where they argue, okay, well, most of the research looks at 30 seconds. For example, most of the research looks at 30 seconds. We're going to look at 25 seconds. And you go, all right, it's a legitimate physiological question, but is it the most interesting, or is it going to have a lot of practical significance compared to I should write it? That's not the problem. The problem as a coach isn't 25 or 26 seconds. The problem as a strength coach wasn't should we do 5 reps or 6 reps. It's minute. It's not a significant thing. Let's instead focus on something bigger, right? Let's focus on something that maybe has a bigger impact. And I'm just putting together, and this, I knew this was going to happen with today's chat too, right? Because just generating ideas, and if I can think about research in this area, but the social dynamics of also drafting in running or cycling and those sports too, where you have a team of people helping you set a pace, or right, you're falling behind, and how you transition that. So I might think about it being more in the sprint area as the teamwork and the communication involved in handing off a baton and a relay, but I can think about it in longer distance sports too, and how you get people to function on a team together and then support each other. Yeah, and what a difference that makes for people's motive, especially recreationally too. And for masters athletes, to be in a supportive environment where it's fun, it's engaging, it's a social activity. It's also can be competitive. Arguably that's a hell of a lot more important than 100 yards or 10 seconds or one rest here and there, so.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So in your experience, what sports may be leading the way when it comes to accreditation? We have USA Triathlon, USA Cycling Australia, British Cycling, et cetera. And a majority of coaches do go out and get accredited. But then there isn't a whole lot of this discussed around the sociology, the biopsychosocial kind of models.
Yeah.
It's really, going to be 90%, a heart rate pace-based type science-focused biology. What kind of sports do you see leading the way, or where do you see areas of opportunity as well?
Yeah, I think the opportunity is to continue to advance coaching into something that is a baseline for everybody, but also more robust. I think my email, I'm sorry, I turned it off. Sorry, my email dinged and I thought I got confused there for a sec. So to go back to the point, I think there's a lot of opportunity to have a baseline for coaching education that is a little bit more comprehensive than it currently is. And it includes some very important things like, safe sport and abuse prevention and reduction. It includes basic sports psychology for mental skills, and referral for more clinical things, being observant of issues like eating disorder, self-harm, violence, substance use and abuse, and a host of other things. So it'd be really great if coaches had more training on all of that, right? And we're aware of their own role and how training and sport contributes to those issues, as well as how they can make referrals to good medical professionals and therapists. And also socially, we do see a movement. I was on a program with USA Lacrosse, was doing some good work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the NSCA has a special interest group doing it, but really integrating that and then leaning upon experts in sociology and cultural sports psychology, diversity that can do that better too. It goes every which way. I've seen natural scientists, and physiologists oriented people trying to do diversity training, and right. I wouldn't want to teach a doctoral level class in exercise physiology. I'm good. I'm not that good. Right? The same thing. There's a lot of folks out there, and there's a lot of good research that ways that we can make sport more inclusive and adapt it to a variety of bodies and abilities. And those are often social factors are often the leading cause or contributing factor of why people engage or don't engage in certain sports too. So I think there's a tremendous
Yeah.
area for growth to go in that direction. I think, like you said, USOC, USOPC, and a lot of the organizations that are either at that umbrella or similar, or trying to apply for USOPC status as an Olympic sport, they do a lot of good work, but they also need, I think, some independent oversight too. Time and time again, we see
Uh-huh.
gaps in their education and regulation. I study a bit on abuse in sport. And so when you can look at USA Gymnastics and swimming, and this is in football, and those are common areas where you see pretty high prevalence. There's reasons why that
Mm-hmm.
stuff happens, and nobody's doing really a great job of preventing that. And we don't have independent accountability in those areas. So there are a lot of groups that do
Right.
good coach education, but like you said too, right? It's often technical and tactical, uh, physiological,
Right.
biomechanical, some nutrition, maybe a bit now on um, heat-related illnesses and conditions, cold as well, and you see that right in endurance or ultra events. But the whole psychosocial piece is usually marginalized or left behind, and advocates like myself too kind of be like, hey guys, let's make this a little bit more inclusive. I know you're trying to get people out there and not create more
Yeah.
barriers, but also by not addressing it, you're by default reproducing the same system that has barriers too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You wrote once, and I have it here, it's unethical and shameful that we focus more on muscles and movement than our humanity.
Did I write that? That sounds good.
It's in one of your blog posts. I got a few more quotes here from you.
Did I say that? Where did I say that?
But yeah,
I
that
know.
humanity aspect. And when I think about that quote, unfortunately, in our space of endurance sports, it's kind of like NFTs right now, but there's this big bubble of discussion around AI. And
Yeah.
we talk
Yeah.
about there's so much discussion around AI and it's going to take over the world. And the more I think about AI, the more I think it's getting away farther and farther away from humanity and actually building the best athlete possible.
Right. When you look at
Thoughts
some of
around
the,
AI and
yeah,
coaching.
right. I thought about that, right? It's certainly a growing thing, right? I want to punch in, I haven't done it yet, but punch into AI, like design a training program for, you know, a beginner,
Right.
a
Yeah.
novice runner, or a weightlifter. Like if it's just going to, scroll through, databases and other gray material and then spit out a formula. And there's apps that do that too. There's apps that have been built out that are just program and copy and paste. And I'll tell you too, right? In sport and in coaching and teaching, it's right. The difference maker isn't the physiology or the biomechanics.
Mm.
After you've kind of get a sufficient level, it's really
Right.
relationships, it's connection, it's motivation, it's the environment that wants to keep you in there and keep you active. And when you lose that, is when
Yeah.
you're going to start to lose people and have lower outcomes too. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Certainly
certainly
believing
an
in the human.
interesting area.
Yeah. I mean, that really is a difference maker is, the better you get, the more that human interaction actually plays a bigger and bigger role. Um, and you also mentioned, have another quote of yours here. Coaching is always an ethical act. A brief interaction or comment in the coach athlete relationship can trigger profound consequences. I think like
Yeah,
almost every one of us can somehow think about in our history interaction with a coach, both the very hopefully positive, but also there's probably a very negative interaction somewhere along the way with a
yeah,
coach that lasts with you your entire lifetime.
yep.
So being aware of that as a coach and how you can have an absolute impact, positive and negative, for an entire lifetime.
Well, that's it. I mean, if we combine the social sciences right on emotions too, right? If the emotions trigger lifelong memories. And so what you just said
Right.
too, I thought about at least four different incidents from being an athlete to a coach where it was good and bad, that were all highly emotionally charged incidents. And it could be from when
Yeah.
my high school coach um, got the team to write a condolence card when my mom died going into high school. It could be,
Mm.
a college coach berating me and others for no good reason, really. And often just hearing themselves yell to hear them and not treating the athlete who was the son of a donor equally when everybody's doing the same sort of thing. Um, it could be me coaching several years ago, and myself raising my voice and yelling at a high school athlete and apologizing to him afterwards.
Mhm.
Aspects like that, right? Like your emotional intelligence and your knowledge of emotion, because that's going to stick with somebody over possibly an entire lifetime. And there's certainly people, and we often talk about, right, there's sport for performance and there's sport for participation, recreation, leisure, where
Yeah.
performance is not the be all end all, right? And in
Hmm.
today's age, that's an interesting social thing, right? That today's age is really competitive, right? That it's not just good enough to have a sound mind and a sound body like physical education people, but you have to be the best. And if you're not the best, don't even bother, right? And we're not even encouraging lifelong participation in physical activity, physical enjoyment, and movement
Right.
over a lifespan. We don't emphasize adult fitness after they get out of college or professional level, right? We've got such a narrow focus on that. And so people critique it, but again, the forces that profit off of it and tell us to be at the highest level are very, very strong. So the point
Yeah.
was, there's a lot of folks that get out of sport, and I don't like to use the word quit either because they purposefully leave. Like, right, we label them as quitters, and that has a certain connotation and meaning to it. But a lot of people leave because sport isn't fun. It's not enjoyable. It's not good. It doesn't help them. It
Yeah.
doesn't build character and other good outcomes. So they get out of it, and then years later, they're trying to get fit and they're trying to be active, and so they have to go back and deal with the emotional baggage that they had, at a
Yeah.
time when it wasn't a very good experience.
Yeah. I don't like that mentality of early specialization. And
Right.
that's
Right.
sociology right there. Like parents need to get their kids whatever it is, 8-year-old boy into baseball and pitching. They got to make it, to the big leagues. But then have you read the book Range and
I heard that one. Heard that one. Yeah.
the value of having a broad range of experience in different
Yeah.
sports later on actually makes you a better, deeper, athlete, and you can deal with different situations in unique ways instead
Yeah.
of the one way, right? So that, and you mentioned people quitting, and yeah, it's like you specialize at age 10 in swimming and you quit at age 12 and you give up all sports, where it would have
Yeah.
been better to experience 5 different sports. And then later on, you might find the perfect one, which is lacrosse, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's sociology right there that I think is a negative with, especially in the American sports right now, that specialization too early.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a variety of approaches, and I'll give credit to there are physical scientists and psychologists that study growth and maturation, or the over specialization or sports sampling strategies, we call it too.
Yeah, right.
Right? Should you sample early, sample how much? Um, but even just the focus on that whole thing, right? Like that's where like Jay Coakley too in Sociology of Sport. We did an interview with Jay, and I know I've known Jay now for years too, where in a span of about 4 minutes he explained 40, 50 years worth of history in sociology in 4 minutes. So he's like, well, when I was a kid, it was this focus. Then my daughter, it was this focus, and now today's age is this focus. And you're like,
Right.
man, like look at the about every 15 years, right? And in today's age, we're even we want to build, like in his example too, right? Where like you alluded to, was he talked about Tiger Woods, right? After Tiger
Right.
training a tiger, or whatever the book was called, where it's like, but written by Tiger's dad, that it's like, this is how you raised a Tiger Woods. And so
Hmm.
everybody's right, like, oh, cool. All right. I can now raise a Tiger Woods. Like we can manufacture that. We can design that. And that's in today's sort of scientific technology, profitability sort of focus. Whereas, 40 years ago, that was not the focus, you
Yeah.
know? And my dad now
Yeah.
he's 84. And, when I take him to watch my kids' sporting events and look at the fields and how much they travel and play for various things, you know, him and I would debate it. And he would kind of understand it, but not really appreciate it. And then when we kind of did some of these things in person, he's like, all right, now I see what you're talking about, because the level of we're not playing games or playing sport anymore. They're not in the street. He grew up in the Bronx in New York playing sport, stickball in the streets. You go out now, they're
Hmm.
not doing that, So
Yeah.
have we really gotten better in some things? All right. I mean, our race times are down, by some seconds and minutes in some areas, but overall, are we actually more healthy? Are we more enjoying ourselves? Are we benefiting from problem solving and
Yeah.
creative play? Probably not. We got more overuse
Yeah.
injuries. You got more shoulder injuries, elbow injuries in baseball. Those things are rampant. So that's what
Yeah.
sociology does. It makes
Absolutely.
things not fun anymore. Right?
No, it's giving perspective is definitely, the value of it.
Yeah.
So, we think about the art of coaching or the
Yeah.
science of
Yeah.
coaching, the art
Yeah.
and science of
Yeah.
coaching,
Yeah.
and what amount is each, the art and science of coaching?
So I give you an example. This was, I think Robin Jones had wrote about this years ago too now, 15 or whatever years ago, probably longer than that, 20 now. When you say the art of coaching, what are we talking about? What are we really talking
Yeah.
about? Like, you're not painting, you're not sculpting, you're not like doing those sorts of things like an artist. You're not creating music in that. So what are you really talking about? What we're talking about, what he argued in this paper, right, is the social complexities and the general messiness of coaching, right? Like the milieu.
Right.
There's a great word, the milieu in sociology. Like, what is the milieu? It's this weird space that we can't really describe that's kind of there, right? Energy, emotions, the physical, corporal things of things, your subjective embodiment, your interpretation of what things mean. That is the sort of messiness and multifactorial and the multiple connections that you're constantly making. That tends to be more, I think, sociological. So art is nothing more than, in this instance, in most cases, what we really mean by it is it's complex, dynamic, it changes, it's multifactorial.
Yeah.
It's not something that is like creative and unknown and mysterious and mystical, right? Like sometimes we use that word art when we're not sure about things. Well, guess what? You've never been sure about anything, you can joke, except for death and
Yeah.
taxes. Even the hardcore physical scientists aren't sure about everything. It doesn't make sense. None of the equations give you 100% of anything. So what is this illusion that we have
Right.
anyway, that science is so objective and guaranteed and predictable and generalizable that we've never had, but we keep saying that crap, and then we throw in a little bit of art to
Yeah.
make the psychosocial aspect, a little bit murky, whereas people then like eventually are like,
Yeah.
yeah, let's break that down a little bit more and try to get a little bit more light for it, and stop using that language that maybe, or be more mindful of the language when we really, or right when you have better language, and that's what got, when you talk to other folks that get into this, they're like, wow, when I got into this stuff, this is giving me the language and the theoretical concepts and the research to say the things that I've been thinking, but I couldn't articulate it. I've heard a lot of folks like me
Yeah.
that when they get, same thing, like I liked physiology, biomechanics, nutrition, motor learning, but it wasn't until I got into this where I was like, this is what I want to talk about.
Yeah. I love the word milieu, that messiness in the middle. And I think of, when I think of the art of coaching, I think about, well, there's no right or wrong answer. It's like anything where there's not a right or wrong answer, right? becomes the
Yeah.
art of coaching. It's the debate back and forth between coach and athlete, or the coach deciding do this, not that.
Yeah. And I ground myself too, because I don't believe in what I might call naive relativism. Like anything goes. So I won't agree that anything goes, because right, I can go back to basic physiological systems and go, okay, well, right, and I can make up crazy stuff. Well, okay, well, if there's no right answer, there's no one way to do things, then okay, run backwards this time down the hill and see how that works for you. You could come up with some sort of thought experiment to kind of be silly, but also be like, okay,
There's a
well,
range. Yeah.
right, I see your point, right? The same thing for weightlifters.
Right.
Are we ever going to get to a point where we're like, cool, go out and run for 2 hours straight, because that's really going to help you with your performance? Well, no, that's a bit silly. But again, because it's such an extreme, so we can have some, again,
Right.
this is what that science is. This is why I like the fields of science and sociology of science is an area to study, because you can pin down into how does knowledge get created, and you can have some statistical generalizations, but they tend to be very big and broad. Aerobic, anaerobic training and the continuum in there. But again, answering the question of exactly though, how many miles, how much time, how much rest, there's even so many different ways to program that or think about that too. There's at least 3, 4 different really major models and ways of doing that. Perceived effort,
Yeah.
heart rate, uh, you know, physiological, biological
Pace,
markers.
power.
Yeah, you can use a variety of tools. So even the best, and I just saw this this past year or two on social media. Even the best sports scientists are trying to figure things out. They don't. There's no magical knowledge or like secret that they have. Like everybody's got the same databases nowadays. You can all read the same stuff, and everybody's trying to go out there and play and manipulate things to do the best they can. I love.
Yeah.
I'm going to digress into another area, but I'm thinking of how we have a fascination with certain cultures or contexts too, and we love to attribute some sort of mystical, magical food or something is in the water that makes a particular group of people or a context superpowers, and you're like, nah, it ain't that
Right.
either.
Yeah. You mentioned theory. There's the theory of science. One concept builds on another and leads to another, and we prove it
Aggressive, yeah.
out every step along the way. Is there the theory of sociology? Does one building block build upon another? Like, are there even relationships you can automatically make? Like, is there a
Yeah.
theory of sociology?
Like a grand narrative, we might call it, like a theory that explains all the theories, or a theory that kind of pieces
Well, I
it all
mean,
together.
we build a base around science
Yeah,
and we build up from there, from the basics, and
yeah,
just one building block on another, and you prove it out every step of the way.
yeah.
Sociology, it just doesn't. It,
Well, so okay, so
it
like some
doesn't
sort of
seem to be right.
we would typically say so. Yeah, some sort of functionalist or grand narrative perspective that kind of explains things the best or the most or with great parsimony in simplistic form, right? That's more of a psychological concept that's popularized here. Like the simplest explanation works, and you're like, well, what if it's not simple? But anyway, um, even the use of science to give you a base. So if I think about philosophy of science, and again how that intersects with social theory, that there are leading or very dominant or popular theories of the day. The theories, and this is I'm weak in endurance sports, but the idea that there's a central governor theory, right? That's pretty popular in
Yeah.
endurance sports. But also people have
Mm-hmm.
critiqued that and said, well, wait a minute, that only explains so much too. And let's look at the mental aspects or psychological aspects of performance, and we have to account for that somehow too. Um, and so is it really this magical central governor, or is it a combination with psychology and other factors too? So that would be a way that we might think about a dominant paradigm or a dominant theory that explains something. And we're all kind of operating along that line until, and it's progressive. We continue to build upon that and build upon that in slow and incremental ways with additional research. We very carefully understand causal mechanisms better, and we keep building to that theory until one day we say this theory is wrong. And then we critique that theory, and people say, no, you can't do that. And then they say, maybe you can do that. Oh, I see your new evidence is better. Now I'm going to believe this new theory, and the cycle repeats. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there are still areas where that exists. And then there's, that sort of theorizing or philosophizing maybe is good for a particular phenomenon, trying to understand something like performance and running. But if you come across a paradigm change in something else, like so AI could totally upend that, or that's only one way of thinking for a particular tool or a particular understanding. If you want to get more kids involved in sport or solve a different problem, that way of thinking is not necessarily going to help you with it too. Like there is no grand theory kind of in the other some other domains. So
Yeah.
stop. I'm kind of getting rambling a little bit, but it makes me think of paradigm and paradigm shifting kind of talk too.
Yeah. Well, in the world we live in today, we just mentioned AI, consequences of that, where that might fit in, and how that affects, I guess, coach-athlete relationships, and creating successful athletes, yes or no. But another big thing in our world today is social media.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
that affects athletes, that affects coaches. It's hey, coach, why are we doing this today? I see the other team across town is doing this.
Yeah.
Why aren't we doing that? And this FOMO, fear of missing out, and just that builds anxiety. And how do I compare? And I'm not good enough. And, oh, I'm horrible. And all we're doing is practicing. That have you come across research around social media effects within and sociology and
Oh yeah.
within athletics?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's good bit of research on social media, all the things that you just said, as well as the other one, like presentation of self and the social media front that people put out there, which is, to be
Right.
often to be consumed for fame, fortune, and attention, not because it's
Mm-hmm.
truthful, right? And there's so much the
Yeah.
combination now with AI that people can put things out there and totally manufacture it, or now you've got just
Right.
the
The two
AI
together.
accounts. Yeah, right. It goes hand in hand, and so there's other research too that looks at like, and I don't know it as well. I think it's fascinating, but like simulacra, like mimicry in a way, and you're trying to mimic things that you see and create a replica of things, and then there's just totally
Right.
fantastical sorts of things too that are so staged, but they look real, but they're not real at all. You might think about somebody doing some sort of, ultra event or claiming to do something that's so extreme or so grueling that
Yeah.
everybody that's on the inside is kind of like, I don't know about this. This seems a little bit fabricated here, you know? Or they're like, wow, yeah, we should totally do that too. So, yeah, that's just another thing to think about, along with the people with AI, with the internet, and with social media. People are like, oh, right, like we have so much knowledge in our hands. Do you? You're right. You don't really have necessarily quality control or trustworthy mechanisms in that knowledge, and you also have so much in today's age that you're totally overloaded in this stuff. Like, how do you decide?
Yeah.
Even if you're in sports science, how do you decide what sports science is the best? Right? It's like totally
Yeah.
taken for granted. We just assume that more science is better science. Well, how do you still make your decision making? Like talking about your humanity. You're like at the end of the day, right? And I have the purest scientists in mind sometimes that like to think that there is no human interpretation in their science, which for me and for
Mm.
other folks too, are kind of like, hey, I thought we ended this debate a while ago. Like there's obviously some sort of human interaction or interpretation going on. Because if you
Right.
queried a room full of scientists, they might agree on some things, but they must also wildly disagree on things. And you take something like program design and coaching, they could vary considerably across all of that. But if they're all
Yep.
supposedly scientists, isn't the same knowledge informing everything they do? Of course not. But
Yeah.
who wants to talk
Yeah.
about that, especially if that means your science and how we have to incorporate other aspects of humanity into this equation? How do they do that? And that's where you've got to come together. You've got to discuss these things and bring it together. But universities and programs and people also aren't produced like that. We're producing things in silos. So
Yeah.
that's how we see
Yeah.
things in a unique box. So
Yeah. Absolutely. We bring our own unique lens and perspective to everything.
so one in psychology. Yeah, let me give
Go
one
ahead.
example, right? And this is how we talk. Well, in the program, you mentioned program real quick, but we might criticize
Yeah.
psychology or not psychology, but the limitation of using the word bias versus a social frame, right? Bias indicates that people have some sort of natural disposition to think or do something one way and not see it another way. Whereas if you think about it as a more of a social thing, it looks not just to the individual, but to the context and the culture and the history of the individual within that, again, time, that society. So
Yeah.
bias and social framings are different kind of ways of looking at things. So like in our program, right, we know that students are going to think about these things in certain ways. and we'll talk about bias and framing and kind of be like, hey, you see how this has got us thinking one way? So does this. But let's criticize it all and try to be more aware and be more creative in our thinking. So one of the ways that I came up with this here years ago too was construct, critique, and create as a 3C sort of way of thinking about how knowledge and ourselves are created. That we are constructed, like we are constructed people at a particular time, and people in 100 years from now are going to be different. That seems a rather obvious sort of claim, but let's think about how we're constructed. Let's critique that. And then let's think about, right, we're critiquing its limitations. We're critiquing it to be more aware so we can regulate better. And then so we can create our own philosophy, our own way of living, our own ethical standards in practice with others. So those things tie into each other as a use of alliteration to make it kind of sticky, right? So we can kind of keep it in mind. Yeah, construct, critique, and create.
Nice. I like that. And tell me about the program. What kind of coaches sign up for your program, this Masters of Arts Sport Coaching?
Coaches who want to win all the time and be the best. And that's it. If you want to win and be the best, you come to us.
And your team's an athlete.
Our team are the best. We win. All of our coaches and graduates are 100% winners. They've won all the competitions that they've ever been. We crush everybody. So, and we make the most money too. What else do we? So we get a good range. We get a range of, you see kind of clusters. We see clusters at the, fresh out of college, undergrad, want to continue into coaching, and then they've got a degree either in, kinesiology, exercise science, something like that. And they're logically continuing on to build on that. We've got another group that are the non-sport related degree people, the business people, the political science people, communication studies people that are like, hey, I don't want to go sell insurance or do sales. I want to go into something that I enjoy, like sports. So they find our degree. We've also got the older, more mature kind of coaching crowd with several years of experience that might be between 35 and 45 that are like, right, I want to grow my coaching and I want to get better at it. So I'm going to do this degree, and it's going to give me more deeper knowledge and cultural credibility to work my way up the food chain and have greater career mobility too within my organization, as well as moving around to different organizations and becoming more of an administrative leader, manager, head coach, athletic director, coach educator as well.
That's awesome. Is it all virtual, online, in person? What's the makeup or options?
Yeah, and this again, in today's age, right? We're all using technology in different ways. And so I see this. So for us, we are asynchronous, fully online, which means it's not self-paced. It's not you just click through stuff and move your way along. Okay. And I'm familiar with those programs. I've done a lot of those in coaching. A lot of organizations do, and this is in our book. We wrote a book right on coach education. And so there are organizations that do the self-paced, like on-demand education. And you just click through things. Maybe there's some sort of minor interaction or engagement. There's usually no assignments or anything like that. You just click. Maybe there's a lightweight quiz or something like that, and you can take it 1,000,000 times. Our program is asynchronous online. So we follow the DU, University of Denver schedule. Every course is 10 weeks long. Courses are designed based on the description and the goals of the class. And each class has a signature pedagogical assignment. And so we ask ourselves all the time, what do coaches need to know and do? What are the attitude and the values that they should have when they graduate from our program? And so we think about our curriculum then as a way of achieving that end. And so we design classes with a description, with goals, and we create assessments so that way we can track, just like in coaching, did we kind of achieve some of those goals and how do we get there? And then from there, we build out what we call universal design for learning too. So we build out a variety of ways. Could be lecture, could be videos, could be external videos. We do custom animations as well as other multimodal instructional strategies to help people develop deep learning. And we check for understanding versus with different ways. So All that to say 10 weeks, asynchronous, they follow a path. They're constantly engaged with the instructor. They're getting feedback. We're working through problems. They're discussing things with others. They're submitting things that are real world applications. They're asking questions about themselves and the coaching context that they're working in or where they might want to work in. And then they're building real world tools and problem solving strategies. Again, we believe in the interaction of theory and practice. We call it praxis, 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 right? They go together. It's not just, bizarro ivory tower nonsense, right? I'm familiar with that, but it's also not just here's the plan, do these things. It's not that basic. It's not dumbed down.
Right.
So it's a combination of those things
right.
to challenge and support them to become what we call scholar coaches. We want them to be great doers and great thinkers, and emotionally, as we talk about emotions, right? Be emotionally attuned and have great values to do it the right way.
And they don't have to be currently coaching, right? You mentioned some folks aren't coaching at all right now.
Most of them are. It's on a rare occasion that somebody's not coaching. Now, we do have a reflective practice course that does require them to be engaged in coaching or administrative responsibilities.
Okay.
And then when they work their way now through this applied research project, they have to be working as a coach or with a community partner to do real world evidence strategic change. If I make it simpler, without it's based on a framework called action research. So they have to do real things in a real world, but it's not just do whatever you please. It's think like a scholar coach and make real world changes and improvements. So you've got to do that. You can't just think about it. It's not a thought experiment that you can do, in a philosophical sort of way.
Yeah. We obviously had all the hockey coaches at DU through the program because multi-time national champion hockey team. So
they it's funny here as well as elsewhere. I'd say if you talk to, if you survey a variety of coach educators, the coaches that are already at the high performing level or already at that kind of level, they're generally so busy, and if they really attribute their success to what they're already doing, they're not going to go back to school too formally. Now, some of them do, but if you're like Bill Belichick, now maybe Bill Belichick will get some time off and go back to school.
Yeah,
right? But if you're already at that level, right, you're not probably doing it. It's as you're working your way up, to be able to juggle, a master's degree while working at that level is pretty rare. They've
well, they did it before they became national champions. So
oftentimes, yeah. I mean, well, here I don't know Coach Carl as well as Bill Tierney, the old lacrosse coach that just retired here, but like me, he's got a phys ed degree from New York. I'm from Cleveland, but he's got a physical education undergraduate degree. Like for me, and I've coached with people with different degrees, and we all have different strengths and weaknesses, but having a degree and knowledge this specific to something that you do, it makes a difference. For the better on average. It seems like a wild claim that I even kind of hesitate to make, but in today's age, right, on average, would you want your doctor not going to school or having some sort of qualification? We'd say no, right? It's too haphazard. Same thing. I would not want Joe Schmo off the street to design my program. They can think very creatively because they haven't had the same socialization experiences, but with a high quality education, you learn to think. You don't learn just to do and replicate and be an automaton or a robot, right, or what we call a technician or a technocrat. You're not just AI. There you go.
Yeah. Here. Hey, are you on Twitter, Instagram? How can people find you, follow you?
It's all just, on all of them, it's just either my name or just at Dr. Gearity. So DrGearity. Awesome. Every now and then I'll post some humor, I'll post some barbecue, some wine, and some other things about coaching too, occasionally. So just
nice. Telling all those strengths. Go ahead.
I just saw a defensive line guy on Instagram, and I commented. I don't lurk too much or comment too much just because you get busy and you don't want to get into Twitter debates with people and that. But he was commenting about back squatting for defensive linemen, and I was like, well, let's let's think about this here, because there were some questions in the logic about back squatting for defensive linemen in this case hurts your back and it makes you stiff, and they don't have to do it. And I'm like, well, let's think about this, right? Your causal mechanisms were a little bit confusing there, and really, what's your problem? So I made a comment on that one. There's other things that this individual posts all the time that's really good, with techniques and drills and skills. Great. So, hey, anyway.
Just tell the lineman to go run 3 hours and it'll make them better.
Well, right. When you think about endurance, that's what they used to do at baseball in particular, back in the day, right? Baseball is to go run distance. And you're like, nowadays we're like, no, go run sprints. It's a totally anaerobic activity. But running, right? Just like the cardio phase back in the day, cardio, right? John Cooper, and I think his first name was John, right? Or Kenneth Cooper, maybe. I think it was Ken Cooper. Dr. Cooper out of Texas. The big thing was just go run for your heart health, which there's some truth to that too. But, as the general thing for everybody in all cases and in anaerobic sports, no, it's not a desirable thing. So just depends. It depends.
Awesome. Hey, you've made us think today, so I appreciate that. And thanks a lot for sharing, opening our eyes to a whole new kind of area of coaching, if you will. And we need to be thinking more about that. So thank you very much for all the words of wisdom, and people can find you online. So thanks so much.
Thanks. Yeah. Follow us, holler and send a message or comment on something, and I'll engage and respond. I love hearing from people and having a dialogue about it. It's fun. So thank you too, Dirk.
Thanks for listening to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources.